The sound of desperate pounding shattered the silence of my Flagstaff home at exactly 3:17 a.m. Each thunderous knock sent shockwaves through my 63-year-old bones, reverberating through the walls like gunshots in the desert night. I knew instantly that whatever stood behind that door would change everything forever. The kind of knocking that only comes with life or death urgency. The kind that makes your blood freeze and your heart race simultaneously. My name is Eileen Boyd, and at my age, you learn to expect the unexpected. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I was about to face. 5 years ago, I buried my son. 5 years ago, I watched them lower Jonathan Boyd's casket into the cold Arizona earth while I sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes had no more tears left to give. My 40-year-old son, my only child, my reason for living, gone in what they called a tragic accident involving his construction company's equipment failure. The insurance payout of $847,000 had been small comfort for the gaping hole in my heart. Tonight was supposed to be peaceful. Tomorrow would mark the 5th anniversary of Jonathan's death, and I had been preparing for another day of grief, another day of visiting his grave with fresh flowers and whispered apologies for not being able to save him. The house felt emptier than usual, filled only with memories and the phantom echoes of his laughter. But that knocking, that desperate, frantic knocking. I shuffled to the front door in my worn slippers, my arthritic hands trembling as I reached for the deadbolt. The Arizona night air was crisp, carrying the scent of desert sage and something else, something that made my skin crawl with an inexplicable dread. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking with fear and confusion. Silence. Then, a voice that made my legs buckle and my world collapse. "Mom, please, it's me." That voice. God help me. That voice was identical to my dead son's. Against every instinct screaming at me to call the police, to run, to hide, I unlocked the door with shaking fingers. The heavy wooden barrier swung open, and I found myself staring into the hollow, desperate eyes of a man who looked exactly like Jonathan. But wrong, so terrifyingly wrong. He stood there, trembling like a leaf in a windstorm, his clothes torn and filthy, dirt caked under his fingernails and streaked across his gaunt face. His hair was longer, wilder, and his eyes held a haunted quality that made my stomach churn with terror and impossible hope. "Mom, I don't have much time," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the night wind. "They're coming. They know I escaped." Escaped? Escaped from where? From death itself? My rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that grief had finally driven me over the edge into madness. But my mother's heart, that part of me that had never stopped aching for my lost child, recognized something in those eyes, something uniquely, unmistakably Jonathan. Without thinking, I grabbed his arm and pulled him inside, slamming the door behind us and throwing every lock I had. His skin was ice cold, and he smelled of earth and fear and something metallic that made my nose wrinkle. "Jonathan," I whispered, my voice barely a breath, "is it really you? But you're supposed to be dead," he finished, his eyes darting frantically toward the windows. "I know, Mom. I know what you think happened, but it was all a lie. Everything was a lie." That's when we heard them, the screams, blood-curdling, animalistic screams coming from my backyard, growing louder and more desperate with each passing second. The sound was inhuman, like something being torn apart slowly, methodically. Jonathan's face went white as fresh snow. "They found me," he gasped. "Mom, whatever happens, you have to know the truth about what really happened 5 years ago, about why they wanted me dead, about the $2.3 million I discovered they stole from the city's infrastructure fund." The screams grew louder, closer, and I saw shadows moving past my kitchen window. If you're watching this story unfold, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. I have a feeling you're going to want to follow this journey to its shocking conclusion. And leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there, because I need to know there are people out there who believe in the impossible, just like I had to that night. 5 minutes after those terrifying screams began, they stopped as suddenly as they'd started. The silence that followed was somehow worse, thick, oppressive, like the calm before a devastating storm. Jonathan pressed himself against the living room wall, his entire body shaking with a terror so intense I could feel it radiating from him in waves. Tell me everything, I demanded, surprised by the steel in my own voice. Right now, before whoever's out there decides to come for us. Jonathan's hands were filthy, his fingernails caked with what looked like dried blood and dirt. As he began to speak, his words tumbled out in a frantic rush, painting a picture so horrifying that my comfortable world crumbled piece by piece. Mom, the construction accident that supposedly killed me, it wasn't an accident. It was attempted murder. His voice cracked on the word murder, and I felt my knees go weak. I discovered something I wasn't supposed to see. City Councilman Richard Hawthorne and his business partner, my own foreman Jake Sullivan, were stealing millions from the municipal infrastructure budget. The names hit me like physical blows. Richard Hawthorne, the man who delivered such a touching eulogy at Jonathan's funeral. Jake Sullivan, who'd cried harder than anyone when they lowered the casket, who'd helped me with funeral expenses, who'd even contributed $15,000 to the memorial fund. I found the falsified invoices, Mom. Phantom projects that never existed. Equipment purchases that went straight into their personal accounts. They'd stolen $2.3 million over 3 years. And I had proof, photographs, bank records, everything. My living room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in as the magnitude of his words sank in. But the insurance investigation, they said the crane malfunctioned because Jake tampered with it. He knew my schedule, knew exactly when I'd be operating that specific machine. The hydraulic lines were cut just enough to fail catastrophically after 20 minutes of operation. Jonathan's eyes were wild now, the memory clearly tormenting him. But I didn't die, Mom. I should have, but I didn't. Then where have you been for 5 years? The question came out as a whisper, because part of me was terrified of the answer. Underground. Literally. He pulled up his shirt, revealing a network of scars across his chest and abdomen that made me gasp. Jake's people found me in the hospital. I'd been unconscious for 3 days, and they needed to make sure I stayed dead. They drugged me, faked my death certificate, and sold me. Sold you? The words didn't make sense. This couldn't be real. Human trafficking, Mom. Forced labor in illegal mining operations in Mexico. Hawthorne has connections with cartels. They needed workers for their underground drug labs and mining operations. People who were already dead, who couldn't be traced. His voice broke completely then. I've been digging tunnels and processing chemicals for 5 years, watching men die around me, planning my escape. The room spun around me. The man I'd mourned, whose grave I'd visited every week with fresh flowers, had been alive and suffering while I'd been collecting his life insurance money. The $847,000 I'd received felt suddenly dirty. Blood money paid for a crime that had never actually occurred. How did you escape? I managed to ask. 3 weeks ago, there was a tunnel collapse. In the chaos, I managed to get away with 2 other men, Carlos and Miguel. We've been traveling north ever since, hiding, stealing food, sleeping in abandoned buildings. He grabbed my hands with his dirt-encrusted fingers. But Hawthorne's people have been hunting us. They caught Carlos 2 days ago. They made Miguel watch what they did to him. Miguel told me everything before he died yesterday. Another wave of screams erupted from the backyard, different this time, more organized, more human. Voices shouting commands in both English and Spanish. "They're here," Jonathan whispered. "Mom, we have to run. Now." "No." The word came out stronger than I felt. "I've been running from your death for 5 years, Jonathan. I'm not running anymore." I walked to my bedroom closet and pulled out the shoebox I'd hidden behind my winter coats. The box containing $127,000 in cash I'd been saving from the insurance money, originally intended for a memorial scholarship in Jonathan's name. But if my son was alive, if he was here, then this money would serve a very different purpose. "We're not running," I repeated, counting out $50,000 and stuffing it into my purse. "We're fighting back." The sound of my back door being forced open echoed through the house. Heavy footsteps, multiple sets, moving through my kitchen with military precision. Jonathan's face was a mask of terror, but something else flickered in his eyes, a spark of hope he'd probably thought was dead forever. "Mom, they're not just after me anymore. Now they know you've seen me alive. They'll kill you too." "Let them try," I said, surprising myself with my own courage. "I've got nothing left to lose and everything to gain." The footsteps were getting closer, and I could hear whispered conversations in the hallway. But for the first time in 5 years, I felt truly alive. My son was home, and whoever had taken him from me was about to learn that you don't mess with a mother's love, not without paying a price that would destroy them completely. The first gunshot shattered my kitchen window at exactly 3:47 a.m., sending glass cascades across the linoleum floor where I'd made Jonathan's favorite pancakes 1,000 times before his supposed death. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap that seemed to tear reality itself in half. "Stay low," Jonathan hissed, grabbing my arm and pulling me behind my grandfather's old oak credenza. His survival instincts were sharp, honed by 5 years of living in constant fear. "They're not here to talk, Mom. These aren't police. They're Hawthorne's cleanup crew." Through the splintered remains of my kitchen window, I could see flashlight beams dancing across my backyard like deadly fireflies. At least 4 men, maybe more, spreading out to surround the house with military precision. These weren't common criminals. They moved with the coordination of professionals. "Mrs. Boyd," a voice called out, sickeningly polite despite the circumstances. "We know you're in there, and we know you're not alone. We just want to have a conversation about your unexpected house guest." I recognized the voice immediately, and my blood turned to ice water in my veins. Jake Sullivan, the man who'd helped me plan my son's funeral, who'd held me when I cried over the casket, who'd looked me in the eye and lied with such conviction that I'd never doubted his grief was genuine. "You lying bastard," I whispered, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. Jonathan's eyes widened with shock at my language, but there was something else there: pride. His scared, broken mother was finally showing some fight. "Mrs. Boyd, I understand this is confusing," Jake continued, his voice growing closer. "But your son has been telling you lies. He's not the man you remember. 5 years in captivity has changed him, made him dangerous. We're here to help." "Help?" Jonathan's voice was barely audible, but the rage in it was unmistakable. "He's going to tell you I'm mentally unstable, that the trauma made me delusional. It's their standard protocol for escaped slaves who try to return home." My heart clenched at the word slaves. My son, my brilliant, kind, hard-working son, had been reduced to nothing more than property for 5 years. The thought filled me with a fury so intense it scared me. "I have an idea," I whispered, pulling out my cell phone. "But you're going to have to trust me." I dialed 911, but before Jonathan could protest, I held up my hand. "911 emergency?" "Yes, this is Eileen Boyd at 1247 Pine Ridge Drive in Flagstaff. There are armed men surrounding my house, and they're shooting at us. I need police and SWAT immediately." Jake's voice changed instantly, losing all pretense of politeness. "Damn it! Move in now! We need to clean this up before the cavalry arrives." The sound of breaking glass came from multiple directions. They were entering through every possible point. My quiet home had become a war zone, and I was no longer the grieving widow I'd been an hour ago. I was a mother protecting her child, and that made me more dangerous than any of them could imagine. "The basement," Jonathan whispered urgently. "I saw the entrance when we came in. If we can get down there—" "No." I stood up, feeling decades of suppressed rage coursing through my veins. "I'm done hiding, I'm done running, and I'm done letting these monsters control our lives." I walked to my bedroom and opened the gun safe my late husband had installed 30 years ago. Inside was his service revolver from his days as a sheriff's deputy, along with a box of ammunition I'd never touched. My hands were steady as I loaded the chamber, steadier than they'd been in years. "Mom, what are you doing?" Jonathan's voice was panicked. What I should have done 5 years ago if I'd known the truth. I checked the safety and tucked the gun into my waistband. Jake Sullivan stole my son from me. He let me bury an empty casket while my child suffered in hell. He took $847,000 of insurance money for a death that never happened. Footsteps were moving through my living room now, heavy boots on the hardwood floors I'd polished just yesterday. Multiple voices coordinating their search, speaking in the clipped tones of professional killers. "Mrs. Boyd!" Jake's voice was closer now, probably in my dining room. "I know you're scared, but if you cooperate, we can work something out. Maybe even some financial compensation for your trouble. Say, $100,000 cash, tax-free." The audacity of the offer made me laugh, actually laugh, for the first time in 5 years. He was trying to buy my silence with money, as if any amount could compensate for what he'd stolen from me. "Counteroffer," I called back, my voice carrying through the house with surprising strength. "You have 30 seconds to get out of my home before the police arrive, or I start shooting to protect my family." Silence. Then, whispered conversations I couldn't make out. "Mom, Jonathan said softly. You don't understand what you're dealing with. These men have killed before. They won't hesitate to— Good, I interrupted. Neither will I. The sound of sirens in the distance made Jake's voice turn desperate. You're making a big mistake, lady. Your son is a wanted fugitive, a drug dealer. You're harboring a criminal. The only criminals I see are the ones breaking into my house, I shouted back. The sirens were getting louder, and I could hear panic in the intruders' voices now. Whatever their plan had been, it clearly hadn't accounted for police involvement. Fall back! Fall back! Jake commanded. We'll handle this differently. The sound of rapid footsteps moving toward my back door told me they were retreating, but I knew this was far from over. This was just the opening move in a game where the stakes were my son's life, and now mine. As red and blue lights began flashing through my windows, I looked at Jonathan and saw something I hadn't seen since he was a child. Hope. Welcome home, son, I whispered. Now let's make them pay. The Flagstaff police arrived like a small army, 8 patrol cars, 2 SWAT vehicles, and an ambulance, their emergency lights painting my quiet neighborhood in a kaleidoscope of red and blue. Detective Maria Rodriguez, a stern-faced woman in her 40s, took one look at Jonathan and immediately called for backup. The resemblance to the photos in his death file was unmistakable, but the implications were staggering. Mrs. Boyd, Detective Rodriguez said carefully, we're going to need to hear this story from the beginning. And I mean everything. For the next 3 hours, sitting in my living room, surrounded by crime scene investigators and evidence technicians, we told our tale. Jonathan's voice was steady now, no longer the terrified whisper of a hunted man, but the clear testimony of someone who'd finally found safety. Detective Rodriguez listened without interruption, taking careful notes as Jonathan described the corruption scheme, his staged death, and the 5 years of forced labor. When he mentioned Councilman Richard Hawthorne, her pen stopped moving. That's a serious accusation, she said slowly. Richard Hawthorne has been a city councilman for 12 years. He's running for mayor next month, which is exactly why he needed me dead, Jonathan replied. He couldn't risk exposure, not with his political career taking off. The $2.3 million he stole was just the beginning. His mayoral campaign has been funded by cartel money. Detective Rodriguez's radio crackled to life. Detective, we've got a problem. We found evidence of recent gunfire around the property, but no signs of the intruders. However, we did find something else. Surveillance equipment. Professional grade, hidden in the trees surrounding the house. My blood ran cold. How long has that been there? Based on the weathering, at least several months, maybe longer. The implications hit me like a physical blow. They'd been watching me, probably since Jonathan escaped. They'd known he might try to return home, and they'd been prepared. There's something else, Detective Rodriguez continued, her expression grim. I ran Jake Sullivan's name through our database. He died in a car accident 6 months ago. Jonathan's face went white. That's impossible. I saw him in Mexico just last month. He was overseeing a new mining operation. Then whoever you saw was using his identity. The real Jake Sullivan is buried in Flagstaff Cemetery, right next to where your own grave marker stands. The room felt like it was spinning. If Jake Sullivan was dead, then who had been running the operation? Who had called out to us tonight? Detective, I said slowly, I think we need to examine my son's grave. 2 hours later, standing in the early morning mist of Flagstaff Cemetery, we watched as the groundskeeping crew carefully opened the plot I'd visited every week for 5 years. I'd brought fresh flowers to this spot, had tearful conversations with the headstone bearing my son's name, had poured my heart out to what I thought were his remains. The casket was empty. Not just empty, filled with sand and concrete blocks to approximate the weight of a body. The funeral home records showed that Jake Sullivan had personally overseen the preparation of Jonathan's body and had specifically requested a closed casket service due to the extensive injuries from the construction accident. This is evidence of massive fraud, Detective Rodriguez said, photographing the empty casket. Insurance fraud, identity theft, falsifying death certificates, human trafficking. We're looking at federal charges here. But even as she spoke, I could see the doubt in her eyes. The investigation would take months, maybe years. Meanwhile, the people responsible were still free, still dangerous, and now they knew that Jonathan was alive and talking. There's something you need to know, I told the detective. The insurance payout for Jonathan's death was $847,000. I've spent less than $200,000 of it over the years. The rest is in savings accounts and investments. If Jonathan is legally alive, then I committed insurance fraud by keeping that money. Detective Rodriguez looked surprised by my honesty. Mrs. Boyd, you were the victim of an elaborate deception. No prosecutor would charge you under these circumstances. Maybe not, but I want to do the right thing. That money belongs to the insurance company, and I intend to return every penny. But first, I'm going to use it to destroy the people who took my son from me. Jonathan grabbed my arm. Mom, you can't. These people have unlimited resources, political connections, law enforcement contacts. We need to disappear, start over somewhere safe. No, I said firmly. I spent 5 years mourning a son who was alive. I spent 5 years letting his killers walk free. I spent 5 years being a victim. I looked at the empty grave that had defined my existence for half a decade. I'm done being a victim. Detective Rodriguez's phone buzzed with an urgent call. She listened for several minutes, her expression growing increasingly dark. We have a problem, she announced. Councilman Hawthorne just held a press conference. He's claiming that Jonathan Boyd is an imposter, a mentally unstable man who's been stalking Mrs. Boyd for months, pretending to be her dead son. He's requesting a psychiatric evaluation and suggesting that Mrs. Boyd is being manipulated by a dangerous individual. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Even with Jonathan standing right there, with DNA evidence pending, with an empty grave as proof of the conspiracy, Hawthorne was going on the offensive. He's good, Jonathan admitted grudgingly. This is exactly what he did in Mexico when other workers tried to escape, turn the victims into the criminals, make the rescuers into accomplices. But I was smiling now, really smiling, for the first time since this nightmare began. What are you thinking, Mom? Jonathan asked nervously. I'm thinking that Richard Hawthorne just made a very big mistake. He's challenging a mother's love in public, and he has no idea what he's unleashed. I turned to Detective Rodriguez. How long before the DNA results confirm Jonathan's identity? 48 hours for preliminary results. Perfect. That gives me exactly enough time to destroy Hawthorne's credibility before he can destroy ours. The morning sun was rising over Flagstaff, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere out there, the people who'd stolen my son were regrouping, planning their next move, but they'd underestimated the fury of a mother who'd been given a second chance, and that mistake was going to cost them everything. By noon that same day, my kitchen table had been transformed into a war room. Detective Rodriguez had assigned Officer Sarah Chen to provide security while we worked, and my home buzzed with the energy of investigation. Jonathan sat across from me, sketching detailed maps of the underground facilities where he'd been held, his artist's eye for detail proving invaluable. The main compound is about 40 miles southeast of Hermosillo, he explained, his pencil moving with practiced precision. But there are at least 6 satellite operations. They move workers between them regularly to prevent anyone from learning too much about the full scope of the operation. I was taking notes on everything, building a case file that would make Perry Mason proud. 5 years of grief had sharpened my attention to detail, and I wasn't going to let any piece of evidence slip through our fingers. Tell me about the money trail, I said. You mentioned $2.3 million from the City Infrastructure Fund. How did they move it? Shell companies, Jonathan replied without hesitation. Boyd Construction, they actually used my last name, can you believe it, was supposedly a legitimate subcontractor. They'd submit invoices for materials that were never delivered, equipment that was never purchased, labor that was never performed. Officer Chen looked up from her laptop. I've been running searches on Boyd Construction. It was officially dissolved 6 months after Jonathan's supposed death, but the bank accounts remained active for another 2 years. Who had signing authority? I asked. According to state records, Jake Sullivan and... She paused. Richard Hawthorne himself. The pieces were falling into place, but I knew we needed more than circumstantial evidence. Hawthorne was a politician. He'd be skilled at creating plausible explanations for everything. There's something else, Jonathan said quietly. In Mexico, they kept detailed records of all the workers. Photos, medical records, production quotas. They're obsessed with documentation because it helps them track people who try to escape. My phone rang suddenly, and the caller ID made my heart skip a beat. Hawthorne, Richard, office. Answer it, Detective Rodriguez instructed through Officer Chen's radio. We're recording everything. I put the call on speaker and took a deep breath. This is Eileen Boyd. Mrs. Boyd, this is Councilman Hawthorne. His voice was smooth, practiced, but I could detect an undercurrent of desperation. I wanted to personally express my concern about the situation you're facing. This man who's claiming to be your son is my son, I interrupted firmly. Mrs. Boyd, I understand your emotional attachment to this individual, but I'm afraid you're being manipulated by someone who's clearly studied your family history. It's a cruel deception, and my heart goes out to you. Really? I kept my voice steady, professional. That's interesting, Councilman, because I don't recall mentioning your name to any of the investigators. Yet here you are, calling me directly about a case you shouldn't know anything about. Silence. The pause lasted just a beat too long, confirming what I already suspected. Well, naturally, the police department keeps me informed about significant incidents in our community, he recovered smoothly. As a public servant, I like to stay involved. How thoughtful. Tell me, Councilman, do you remember the last time you saw Jake Sullivan? Another pause. Jake Sullivan? He died in that tragic car accident. What, 6 months ago now? Why do you ask? Just curious. You see, someone claiming to be Jake Sullivan was outside my house last night with a group of armed men. Isn't that strange? Mrs. Boyd, I think you may be confused about what... Or maybe, I continued, my voice gaining strength, someone has been using Jake's identity to continue criminal activities that Jake himself might have exposed if he'd lived long enough. I have no idea what you're suggesting, but I think you need professional help dealing with this trauma. I can recommend some excellent psychiatrists who specialize in grief counseling. The patronizing tone in his voice was exactly what I'd been waiting for. That's very kind, Councilman, but I'm not the one who needs help. You are. Excuse me? Well, you're about to be arrested for conspiracy, fraud, human trafficking, and attempted murder. I'd say that qualifies as needing help, wouldn't you? This time, the silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. When Hawthorne spoke again, his voice had changed completely, colder, more calculating. Mrs. Boyd, you have no idea what you're dealing with. This situation could become very dangerous very quickly, especially for elderly women living alone. Is that a threat, Councilman? It's a realistic assessment of the risks involved when people interfere with things they don't understand. Jonathan was staring at me with amazement, clearly not recognizing this steel-spined version of his mother. Truth be told, I barely recognized myself either. Here's what I understand, Richard, I said, using his first name deliberately. I understand that you stole $2.3 million from taxpayer funds. I understand that you had my son murdered to cover it up. I understand that you've been operating illegal mining and drug operations using slave labor. And I understand that you made the mistake of underestimating a mother's love. You can't prove any of that, he said, but the confidence was gone from his voice. Can't I? Would you like to know about the detailed records Jonathan kept of your operations? The photographs he took? The financial documents he copied before his supposed accident? Another long silence. Or perhaps you'd be interested in the testimony of Carlos Martinez and Miguel Vargas. Oh wait, you had them killed, didn't you? But their families in Mexico have been asking questions. Questions that are going to lead some very dangerous people to your door. You're bluffing. Am I? Let's find out. I'll be holding a press conference tomorrow at 2 p.m. on the steps of City Hall. I'll be sharing some very interesting evidence about corruption in our local government. You're welcome to attend. I hung up before he could respond. Officer Chen was grinning. Ma'am, that was brilliant. He just confirmed half our suspicions in one phone call. Jonathan looked at me with new respect. Mom, I think you missed your calling as a detective, but I wasn't smiling anymore. The call had confirmed something else, something that chilled me to the bone. He's going to escalate, I told them. That wasn't a man who's planning to surrender quietly. He's going to come at us with everything he's got. As if summoned by my words, Officer Chen's radio crackled to life. All units, we have a situation at Flagstaff Memorial Hospital. Unknown subjects have attempted to access the records of Jonathan Boyd. Security has them contained, but they're asking for immediate backup. The game was accelerating, and the stakes were getting higher by the hour. But for the first time in 5 years, I felt like I had a real chance to win. Let's go, I said, grabbing my purse and the evidence files. It's time to take this fight directly to them. Flagstaff Memorial Hospital was in chaos when we arrived. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows were parked illegally in the emergency bay, and I could see at least 6 men in dark suits trying to talk their way past hospital security. They had the look of federal agents, but something about their positioning felt wrong. Too aggressive, too desperate. Those aren't FBI, Jonathan whispered, as we watched from Officer Chen's patrol car. "I've seen that formation before. It's Hawthorne's private security team." Detective Rodriguez's voice came through Chen's radio. "Mrs. Boyd, I need you to stay in the vehicle while we assess the situation. These men are claiming to be federal agents investigating a terrorism case." Terrorism? The audacity was breathtaking. Hawthorne was trying to invoke federal authority to seize Jonathan's medical records, probably to destroy any evidence of his survival or to plant evidence of mental instability. "Ma'am," Officer Chen said carefully, "Detective Rodriguez is ordering us to wait for federal verification of their credentials, but I'd already made my decision. At 63 years old, I was done waiting for other people to save my family." "Officer Chen, I'm going into that hospital as a private citizen seeking medical records for my son. There's no law preventing that, is there?" "Well, no, but then that's exactly what I'm going to do." Before anyone could stop me, I was out of the patrol car and walking toward the hospital's main entrance. Behind me, I could hear Officer Chen frantically radioing for instructions, but I didn't slow down. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and I found myself in the familiar antiseptic environment of the hospital where I'd said goodbye to Jonathan 5 years ago. The same smell of disinfectant and floor wax, the same fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and sick. "Excuse me," I said to the receptionist at the information desk. "I need to access my son's medical records from 5 years ago. I'm his next of kin, and I have his death certificate." The young woman behind the desk looked flustered. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we're having some kind of security situation right now. Maybe you could come back tomorrow." "I'm afraid it can't wait," I said firmly. "You see, it turns out my son isn't actually dead, and his medical records from his time here might contain evidence of attempted murder." Her eyes widened, and I could see her trying to process the information. Before she could respond, one of the men in suits appeared beside me. "Mrs. Boyd," he said, in a voice that was probably supposed to sound official. "I'm Agent Martinez with the Department of Homeland Security. I'm going to need you to come with me for questioning regarding your son's terrorist activities." I looked him up and down slowly, taking in details. His suit was expensive, but didn't fit quite right. His shoes were wrong for a federal agent, too flashy, too pointed. And most tellingly, his badge was clipped to his belt rather than displayed in a proper credential case. "Terrorist activities?" I repeated loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear. "Are you referring to my son's 5 years of forced labor in Mexican drug mines, or his recent escape from human traffickers?" The fake agent's face darkened. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice and come with me immediately." "I don't think so," I replied, pulling out my cell phone. "But I would like to call the real Department of Homeland Security to verify your identity. What was your badge number again?" That's when things got interesting. The man reached for my phone, but I was faster than he expected. At my age, you learn to protect the things that matter, and at this moment, my phone was my lifeline. "Help!" I called out as loudly as my voice would carry. "This man is trying to steal my phone!" The hospital lobby erupted in confusion. Security guards came running from multiple directions. Genuine police officers poured through the main entrance, and suddenly, my fake federal agent found himself surrounded by very real law enforcement. "Ma'am, step away from the suspect," ordered a voice I recognized as Detective Rodriguez. I gladly complied, moving to stand behind a genuine police barricade as the fake agents found themselves seriously outnumbered. The leader, my supposed Agent Martinez, was trying to maintain his federal authority, but his story was falling apart under scrutiny. "I demand to speak to your supervisor," he shouted. "This is a federal terrorism investigation." "Really?" Detective Rodriguez's voice was ice cold. "Then you won't mind waiting while we verify your credentials with DHS headquarters in Washington." The man's confident demeanor cracked slightly. "This is a time-sensitive operation. Every minute we waste allows dangerous terrorists to escape." "Speaking of terrorists," I interjected, "would those be the terrorists who've been running slave labor operations in Mexico? Or the terrorists who steal millions of dollars from municipal infrastructure funds?" Several of the fake agents exchanged glances, and I knew I'd hit my target. These men knew exactly what I was talking about because they were part of it. Detective Rodriguez's radio crackled with an update. "Detective, we've confirmed with DHS. They have no agents named Martinez operating in Arizona, and they have no terrorism investigation involving anyone named Boyd." The lobby fell silent, except for the soft background hum of medical equipment and air conditioning. 6 men in expensive suits suddenly looked very much like criminals caught in the act. "Gentlemen," Detective Rodriguez announced formally, "you're under arrest for impersonating federal officers, conspiracy, and attempted fraud." But the leader of the fake agents wasn't finished. As handcuffs were being produced, he looked directly at me with cold, calculating eyes. "Mrs. Boyd, you have 48 hours. After that, this becomes a matter of international security, and local law enforcement won't be able to protect you." "International security?" I repeated. "You mean the security of your drug operations?" "I mean the security of people who have resources you can't imagine and reach you can't escape." Jonathan appeared at my side, having finally been cleared to enter the hospital. His face was grim as he listened to the exchange. "Mom," he said quietly, "he's not bluffing. These operations extend far beyond Flagstaff. We're talking about cartels, corrupt officials on both sides of the border, maybe even some legitimately dangerous people." I looked at my son, my brave, scarred, traumatized son who'd survived 5 years of hell and somehow found the courage to come home. Then I looked at the fake agents being led away in handcuffs, their confident threats now revealed as the desperate bluster of cornered criminals. "Then we better work fast," I said, "because in 48 hours, I plan to have enough evidence to destroy their entire operation." As we walked deeper into the hospital to finally access those medical records, I realized that what had started as a mother's desperate hope for her lost son had become something much larger. We weren't just fighting for our own survival anymore. We were fighting to expose a conspiracy that had destroyed countless lives, and I intended to win. The medical records from Jonathan's fatal accident painted a picture so damning that even I, with my growing suspicion of the conspiracy's scope, was shocked by what we discovered. Dr. Patricia Wilkins, the emergency room physician who'd treated Jonathan 5 years ago, met us in her office with the expression of professional curiosity that quickly transformed into horror as we explained the situation. "Mrs. Boyd, I remember your son's case clearly because it was so unusual, Doctor," Wilkins said, pulling up files on her computer. "The construction accident victims usually present with specific patterns of injury: crush wounds, broken bones, internal bleeding. But Jonathan's injuries were different." She turned her monitor toward us, and I found myself looking at medical photographs that made my stomach churn. Jonathan's injuries from 5 years ago were extensive, but they weren't consistent with a construction accident. "These are chemical burns," Dr. Wilkins explained, pointing to discolored patches on Jonathan's chest and arms. "Specifically, burns from industrial acids commonly used in metal processing, and these puncture wounds here and here, they're too precise to be from falling debris. They look more like injection sites." Jonathan was staring at the photos with growing recognition. "That's exactly right, Dr. Wilkins. They were experimenting with different drugs to keep workers compliant. Some kind of sedative cocktail that would make us docile but still able to perform manual labor. But that's not the most disturbing part," Dr. Wilkins continued. "According to my notes, Mr. Boyd was conscious and coherent when he arrived. His injuries, while serious, were definitely not life-threatening. Yet somehow, after Jake Sullivan arrived claiming to be his emergency contact, Jonathan's condition deteriorated rapidly." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean deteriorated?" "His heart rate became irregular, his blood pressure dropped dramatically, and he went into what appeared to be cardiac arrest. We managed to stabilize him, but he fell into a coma that lasted 3 days." Officer Chen, who'd been quietly taking notes, looked up sharply. "Doctor, is it possible that someone administered drugs to cause those symptoms?" "Not just possible, probable." I noted several unexplained injection sites that appeared after Mr. Sullivan's visit. At the time, I assumed they were from our own medical interventions, but looking at the pattern now, she shook her head grimly. "Someone was deliberately trying to kill your son, Mrs. Boyd." The room felt like it was spinning. Not only had they staged Jonathan's death, but they'd actually tried to murder him in the hospital, in front of doctors and nurses, while I was grieving in the waiting room just down the hall. "There's more," Dr. Wilkins continued. "After the supposed cardiac arrest, Jake Sullivan insisted on making all medical decisions as Jonathan's designated emergency contact. He provided forged documents showing power of attorney, and he specifically requested that no family members be allowed to see the body. "But I did see him," I protested. Before the funeral, I insisted on saying goodbye. No, ma'am, you saw a body. But according to these records, Jake Sullivan arranged for the body to be transferred to a private mortuary before any family viewing. What you saw was likely— She paused, clearly struggling with the implications. A substitute, Jonathan finished quietly. They probably used another body, possibly one of the workers who died in the Mexican operations. The callousness of it was beyond comprehension. They'd let me grieve over a stranger's corpse while my actual son was being shipped off to a life of slavery. Dr. Wilkins, I said carefully, would you be willing to testify about these medical irregularities if this case goes to trial? Absolutely. In fact, I've been troubled by this case for 5 years. Several aspects never made sense medically, but Jake Sullivan was very persuasive, and I had no reason to suspect fraud at the time. Officer Chen's radio crackled with an urgent message. All units, we have a situation developing at City Hall. Councilman Hawthorne is holding an emergency press conference claiming that terrorists are threatening city officials. He's requesting federal protection and suggesting that local law enforcement has been compromised. I looked at Jonathan, and I could see the same realization in his eyes that I was feeling. Hawthorne was escalating again, trying to seize control of the narrative before we could present our evidence. We need to get to that press conference, I said. Right now. Mom, it's too dangerous. If he's claiming terrorist involvement, he might have legitimate federal agents there now. We could walk into a trap. But I was already moving toward the door. Then we'll spring a trap of our own. 15 minutes later, we stood at the edge of the crowd gathered on the steps of City Hall. Hawthorne was in full politician mode, commanding the microphone with practiced authority, his voice carrying across the plaza with grave concern. Received credible intelligence that foreign terrorist organizations have infiltrated our community, he was saying. These dangerous individuals are targeting city officials and spreading disinformation designed to undermine public confidence in our local institutions. The crowd murmured with concern. Hawthorne was good, very good. He was transforming Jonathan from a victim into a threat, and me from a grieving mother into a dupe of foreign agents. The individual claiming to be Jonathan Boyd is actually a trained operative who has been studying Mrs. Boyd's family history for months. This is a sophisticated psychological warfare operation designed to destabilize our upcoming mayoral election. I'd heard enough. Excuse me, I called out, my voice carrying across the plaza with surprising strength. I have a question for the councilman. Hawthorne's eyes found me in the crowd, and for just a moment I saw panic flicker across his carefully controlled expression. Councilman Hawthorne, I continued, walking forward as the crowd parted around me. If this man is a foreign operative studying my family history, how do you explain the fact that his DNA matches samples we have from my son's childhood medical records? The murmur from the crowd grew louder. Hawthorne tried to maintain control, but I could see him calculating, trying to find an angle that would discredit what I'd just revealed. DNA can be fabricated by sophisticated organizations, he replied. This is exactly the kind of misinformation. Really? I interrupted. Then how do you explain the medical records from Flagstaff Memorial Hospital showing that my son was deliberately poisoned while recovering from his injuries 5 years ago? The crowd was fully engaged now, sensing a real confrontation rather than a standard political press conference. Or perhaps you'd like to explain how Jake Sullivan, who you claim died 6 months ago, was able to sign financial documents for Boyd Construction up until last month. Hawthorne's composure was cracking. I have no knowledge of any such documents. Of course not, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Just like you had no knowledge of the $2.3 million in fraudulent city contracts, or the slave labor operations in Mexico, or the human trafficking network that's been using your political connections to operate with impunity. The plaza erupted in shocked voices and shouted questions. Reporters who'd expected a routine terrorism briefing suddenly realized they were witnessing the exposure of a major corruption scandal. These are serious accusations, Hawthorne shouted over the noise, being made by a woman who is clearly being manipulated by dangerous criminals. Then you won't mind submitting to a polygraph test, I replied smoothly. Right here, right now, in front of all these witnesses. The crowd fell silent, waiting for his response. This was the moment of truth. Would he accept the challenge, or would he reveal himself as the coward I knew him to be? Hawthorne looked out over the crowd of reporters, voters, and city officials. His political career hung in the balance, and everyone present knew it. "Mrs. Boyd," he said finally, his voice cold and measured, "you have just made accusations that could be considered treasonous in the current security environment. I strongly advise you to reconsider your position." "Is that another threat, Councilman?" "It's a warning about the consequences of interfering with matters of national security." The crowd was getting restless now, sensing that Hawthorne was avoiding the central questions, but I wasn't finished with him yet. "Then I guess we'll find out tomorrow," I announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "when I present all of our evidence to the FBI, the DEA, and the Department of Justice simultaneously." For the first time since this confrontation began, Hawthorne looked genuinely afraid, and that's when I knew we had him. The next morning, I woke up to find my house surrounded by news vans. Word of yesterday's confrontation at City Hall had spread beyond Flagstaff, and apparently, a 63-year-old grandmother taking on a corrupt politician made for compelling television. My quiet retirement had become a media circus, but for the first time in 5 years, I didn't mind the attention. Jonathan was in my kitchen, looking healthier than he had since his return. A good night's sleep, 3 solid meals, and the knowledge that his story was finally being told had worked wonders for his appearance. He was still thin, still scarred, but his eyes held hope again. "Mom, Detective Rodriguez is here with some federal agents," he called. "Real ones this time. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez of the FBI, no relation to yesterday's imposter, was a no-nonsense woman in her early 40s who listened to our story with the kind of professional attention I'd been hoping to see for days. With her were agents from the DEA and ICE, turning my living room into an impromptu federal task force headquarters. "Mrs. Boyd," Agent Martinez said after reviewing our evidence, "what you've uncovered appears to be part of a much larger operation we've been investigating for 2 years. The trafficking network, the money laundering, the political corruption, it all fits patterns we've been tracking across multiple states." "So you believe us?" Jonathan asked. "We believe the evidence. And frankly, Councilman Hawthorne's behavior yesterday raised enough red flags to justify a full federal investigation." She turned to me with something approaching respect. "Your decision to go public forced his hand. Politicians don't usually threaten elderly widows with treason charges unless they're hiding something significant." Agent Martinez spread a map across my coffee table, marking locations with red pins. "The operation you've described in Mexico is one of at least 12 similar facilities we've identified. They're using a network of corrupt officials on both sides of the border to traffic workers and launder drug money through legitimate businesses." "How many people are we talking about?" I asked. "Conservative estimate? Over 3,000 individuals currently being held in conditions similar to what Jonathan experienced. The financial scope is in the hundreds of millions." The numbers were staggering. What had started as my personal fight to reclaim my son had become part of a fight to save thousands of people from the kind of hell Jonathan had endured. "What do you need from us?" I asked. "Everything. Documents, testimony, financial records, details about the operations in Mexico. Jonathan's first-hand account could be the key to dismantling the entire network." But even as Agent Martinez spoke, I could see concern in her expression. "There's something else, isn't there?" Jonathan prompted. "Councilman Hawthorne didn't come home last night. His wife filed a missing persons report 3 hours ago. His campaign headquarters is empty, and his bank accounts show a large cash withdrawal yesterday evening." My heart sank. "He's running." "It appears so. But running isn't the same as escaping. We have alerts out at every airport, border crossing, and port. If he's still in the country, we'll find him." Officer Chen, who'd been monitoring communications, looked up from her radio. "We've got another problem. The Boyd construction accounts that were supposedly closed, they're active again as of this morning. Someone just transferred $2.7 million to an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands." Agent Martinez cursed under her breath. "He's liquidating assets. Classic pattern when a conspiracy is about to collapse. Grab whatever money you can and disappear." "What about the people still trapped in Mexico?" Jonathan asked urgently. "If Hawthorne's running, they might decide to eliminate the evidence. Those workers, they're all witnesses to what happened." The federal agents exchanged glances, and I could see the grim reality settling over them. We were in a race against time, not just to catch the criminals, but to save the lives of people who were completely helpless to save themselves. "We're coordinating with Mexican authorities," Agent Martinez assured us, "but their response time to remote locations can be challenging." My phone rang suddenly. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it. Mrs. Boyd? The voice was unfamiliar, nervous, with a slight accent. My name is Elena Vargas. Miguel Vargas was my brother. My blood went cold. Miguel was one of the men who'd escaped with Jonathan, one of the men who'd been killed during their journey north. Elena, I'm so sorry for your loss. Mrs. Boyd, Miguel called me before he died. He told me about your son, about what they did to him. He asked me to contact you if anything happened to him. I put the phone on speaker so the federal agents could listen. Elena, where are you calling from? Mexico City. Mrs. Boyd, I'm a journalist. I've been investigating the disappearances in our region for 3 years. Miguel's death gave me the final pieces I needed. Agent Martinez leaned forward. Ms. Vargas, this is the FBI. What information do you have? I have names, locations, financial records, photographs, everything. But more importantly, I have contact with families of workers still trapped in the facilities. They're willing to help rescue their loved ones. This is dangerous work, Agent Martinez warned. If these people suspect you're investigating, they already know. Elena interrupted. There was an attempt on my life yesterday, but I'm not hiding anymore. My brother died to bring this information north. I won't let his sacrifice be meaningless. Jonathan was gripping my hand tightly. The scope of what we were fighting was becoming clearer. This wasn't just about one family's tragedy, but about an entire network of human suffering that had been operating in the shadows for years. Elena, I said, what do you need from us? I need your son to testify about what he saw. I need those medical records to prove the pattern of attempted murder. And I need you to keep fighting, Mrs. Boyd. Your story is the one that broke this open. Agent Martinez was already making calls, coordinating what was clearly going to become a major international operation. But as I listened to her organizing raids and arrests, I realized that our personal battle was far from over. Hawthorne might be running, but he wasn't working alone. Somewhere out there were other people with money, power, and connections. People who wouldn't give up easily on an operation worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Jonathan, I said quietly, this isn't over, is it? He shook his head grimly. Mom, I think it's just beginning. Outside, more news vans were arriving, and I could see protesters gathering across the street, some supporting us, some calling us frauds or terrorists. The story was taking on a life of its own, becoming bigger than just our family's fight for justice. But looking at my son, seeing the strength returning to his eyes, I knew we'd made the right choice. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. And we'd keep fighting until every single person trapped in those facilities was free. 3 days later, the international operation Elena Vargas had helped coordinate was in full swing. Mexican federal police, working with U.S. agencies, had raided 4 facilities and liberated over 400 people. The story was front-page news from Los Angeles to Mexico City, and suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to the grandmother who'd taken on an international trafficking network. But Councilman Richard Hawthorne was still missing, and that bothered me more than all the media attention combined. I was reviewing financial documents with Agent Martinez when my doorbell rang at exactly 6 p.m. Through the peephole, I could see a delivery man holding a large floral arrangement, the kind of expensive display usually sent for funerals or major celebrations. I didn't order flowers, I told Officer Chen, who'd been assigned as my security detail. Don't answer it, she instructed, already reaching for her radio. Something feels wrong. But the delivery man was already walking away, leaving the arrangement on my doorstep. Attached to the elaborate display was an envelope with my name, written in elegant script. 30 minutes later, after the bomb squad had determined the flowers were harmless, I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Mrs. Boyd, congratulations on your recent media success. You've managed to accomplish something quite remarkable, destroying a lucrative business operation while simultaneously signing your own death warrant. I'm not in hiding, as your federal friends assume. I'm simply regrouping. The arrests in Mexico were unfortunate, but hardly unexpected. In any large operation, some assets must occasionally be sacrificed to protect the more valuable components. You see, what you've uncovered is merely one small branch of a much larger tree. The trafficking network extends far beyond Flagstaff, far beyond Mexico, and certainly far beyond your limited understanding. We have operations in 14 countries, political contacts at the highest levels, and resources that dwarf your quaint local police force. Your son was supposed to die 5 years ago. His escape was an embarrassment, but not a catastrophe. However, your decision to involve federal authorities has created complications that require a more permanent solution. You have 24 hours to cease all cooperation with law enforcement, retract your public statements, and convince your son to return voluntarily to our custody. In exchange, you will be allowed to live out your retirement quietly. Refuse, and you will discover that there are fates worse than death, fates that can befall not just you, but everyone you care about. Your neighbors, your friends, the officers protecting you, the journalists covering your story, everyone. The choice is yours, but choose wisely. Some victories are too expensive to celebrate. A friend. P.S. Check your bank accounts. I was shaking as I finished reading. Agent Martinez immediately got on the phone with her superiors while Officer Chen called for additional security. But I was already pulling up my online banking on my laptop, dreading what I might find. My checking account, which had contained $23,000 that morning, now showed a balance of $847,000, exactly the amount of Jonathan's life insurance payout, plus 5 years of interest. They put the money back, I whispered. Jonathan looked over my shoulder and went pale. Mom, that's not generosity. That's a setup. They're creating evidence that you were in on the conspiracy from the beginning. Agent Martinez finished her call and turned to us with grim determination. Hawthorne was spotted 3 hours ago at a private airfield outside Phoenix. We have teams moving to intercept, but, I prompted. The plane he was boarding had diplomatic plates. If he's claiming political asylum somewhere, this could get complicated fast. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in with the reality of what we were facing. This wasn't just a local corruption case anymore. It was an international incident with diplomatic implications. There's something else, Agent Martinez continued reluctantly. We've been monitoring communications, and there's been increased activity among known trafficking networks. Word has spread about what happened here, and it's causing panic among multiple organizations. Meaning they're either going to shut down completely and disappear, or they're going to eliminate anyone who can testify against them, including the workers still in custody and us, Jonathan finished. Before Agent Martinez could respond, Officer Chen's radio exploded with urgent chatter. Multiple units were responding to reports of suspicious activity at various locations around Flagstaff. The homes of hospital staff who'd treated Jonathan, the offices of lawyers who'd handled the insurance case, even the florist who'd delivered the flowers. They're not just threatening us, I realized with growing horror. They're threatening everyone connected to this case. My phone rang. Elena Vargas. Mrs. Boyd, her voice was tight with fear. I'm at Mexico City International Airport. I was supposed to board a flight to Washington to testify before Congress tomorrow, but there are men here, men I recognize from the facilities. Elena, get to security immediately. I tried. Mrs. Boyd, I think some of the airport security are working with them. I'm trapped. Jonathan grabbed the phone. Elena, listen to me carefully. Find a group of American tourists, families with children if possible. Stay with them. Make yourself visible. Use them as shields until you can get to legitimate authorities. I'll try. But Jonathan, they showed me photographs of you and your mother. Current photographs from yesterday. They know exactly where you are. The line went dead. Agent Martinez was already coordinating what was clearly going to be a complex international rescue operation, but I could see the strain on her face. The scope of what we were fighting was beyond anything local or even federal law enforcement was equipped to handle. Mrs. Boyd, she said carefully, I need you to consider the possibility that the safest option might be witness protection, new identities, relocation, complete separation from your current life. Absolutely not, I replied without hesitation. Ma'am, these people have just demonstrated global reach and unlimited resources. They've infiltrated law enforcement agencies, diplomatic services, and financial systems. Staying and fighting might not be heroic, it might be suicidal. Jonathan was staring out the window at the growing crowd of protesters, reporters, and what were probably additional threats disguised as curious onlookers. Mom, he said quietly, maybe Agent Martinez is right. We've exposed them, we've saved hundreds of people, we've done what we set out to do. Maybe it's time to disappear before they make us disappear. I looked at my son, my brave, traumatized, wonderful son, who'd survived 5 years of hell and still had the courage to come home. Then I looked at the letter that was promising to destroy everyone I cared about unless I surrendered everything I'd fought for. No, I said firmly. I spent 5 years believing my son was dead. I spent 5 years letting these monsters operate freely. I spent 5 years being a victim. I stood up, feeling every one of my 63 years, but also feeling stronger than I had in decades. They want to threaten everyone I care about? Good. That means they're scared. They want me to choose between my safety and my principles? They've made the choice easy. I picked up the phone and called the local news station. This is Eileen Boyd. I'd like to schedule a live interview for tonight's broadcast. I have some things to say about terrorists, and I want the whole world to hear them. The final battle was about to begin, and I intended to fight it on my terms. The live television interview that night reached an audience of over 12 million viewers, the largest in the history of Flagstaff's local news station. Sitting in my own living room, surrounded by federal agents and with Jonathan at my side, I looked directly into the camera and told the truth that would change everything. My name is Eileen Boyd, and 6 days ago, I thought my son was dead. Tonight, I want to tell you about the real terrorists, the ones who steal our tax money, who traffic our children, who corrupt our political system, and who think they can intimidate American families into silence. For 37 minutes, I laid out every detail of the conspiracy, every piece of evidence, every connection between local corruption and international crime. But more than that, I spoke as a mother who had found her son, as a citizen who had discovered her voice, and as a woman who had learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can be is someone with nothing left to lose. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, social media was flooded with "Justice for Jonathan" and "Near Eileen Boyd" hashtags. Vigils were organized in dozens of cities. Most importantly, other families began coming forward with stories of missing loved ones, suspicious deaths, and corruption in their own communities. The international implications were even more significant. Elena Vargas, who had successfully reached safety at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, was broadcasting her own evidence across Latin American media. The photographs and financial records she'd gathered provided the final pieces needed to dismantle the entire trafficking network. 48 hours after my television appearance, Richard Hawthorne was arrested at a luxury resort in Costa Rica. The diplomatic immunity he'd been counting on evaporated when the Costa Rican government, under pressure from both the United States and Mexico, declared his visa invalid due to criminal charges pending in multiple jurisdictions. The arrests that followed were like dominoes falling across 2 continents. Jake Sullivan's identity had indeed been stolen by a man named Marcus Webb, who had been operating under multiple false identities for 8 years. The real Jake Sullivan had been murdered specifically to provide Webb with a convincing backstory and access to construction industry connections. Dr. Wilkins's medical testimony proved crucial in establishing the pattern of attempted murder used to fake deaths and facilitate trafficking. The hospital records, combined with financial evidence, demonstrated that at least 47 other construction accidents over the past decade had actually been kidnapping operations. The money trail led to politicians, business leaders, and law enforcement officials in 7 states and 4 countries. The final tally of stolen funds exceeded $400 million, with trafficking operations that had enslaved over 8,000 people during its 15-year existence. But the victory that mattered most to me was personal. Standing in that same cemetery where I'd grieved over an empty grave for 5 years, I watched as my son's name was removed from the headstone that had defined my sorrow. The cemetery plot was filled in and restored to grass, erasing the physical symbol of a lie that had controlled our lives. Jonathan was still healing, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. The scars from 5 years of trauma don't disappear overnight, and there were nights when nightmares still woke him, days when crowds made him panic, moments when the weight of what he'd endured threatened to overwhelm him. But he was alive, he was free, and he was home. The insurance money, all $847,000 of it, was returned to the company that had paid out his death benefit. I'd considered keeping it as compensation for our suffering, but Jonathan and I both agreed that we wanted no part of money connected to their crimes. Instead, we used our story to establish the Jonathan Boyd Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of trafficking victims and funding rescue operations worldwide. Elena Vargas became our first international partner, using her journalism skills and connections to expose similar networks throughout Latin America. Her work led to the liberation of over 2,000 additional victims in the year following our initial revelation. 6 months after that terrifying 3 a.m. knock on my door, I received a letter that brought me to tears, but tears of joy this time. It was from Carlos Martinez's sister, thanking me for ensuring that her brother's death had not been meaningless. His testimony, recorded before his murder and recovered from the traffickers' computers, had provided crucial evidence for convictions in federal court. Richard Hawthorne was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on charges, including conspiracy, human trafficking, money laundering, and murder. His political career, built on the suffering of innocent people, became a cautionary tale about the corruption that can fester when citizens stop paying attention to their elected officials. As I finish telling this story, it's been 1 year since Jonathan came home. He started a new construction business, legitimate this time, specializing in building safe houses for trafficking survivors. His first project was expanding our home to accommodate families who need temporary shelter while rebuilding their lives. The media attention eventually faded, as it always does, but the work continues. Every month brings new families seeking help, new leads about trafficking operations, new opportunities to fight back against the forces that profit from human suffering. If you've watched this story to the end, you're part of something important now. You're part of a community that refuses to look away from injustice, that believes in the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. Please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button if this story moved you. But more than that, I want you to leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Because I want to know that all around the world, at every hour of every day, there are people who believe in fighting for what's right. My name is Eileen Boyd. I'm 64 years old now, and I live in Flagstaff, Arizona, with my son Jonathan. At 3 a.m. on a cold November morning, a knock on my door changed everything. It gave me back my child, showed me my strength, and taught me that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not by soldiers or politicians, but by ordinary people who refuse to accept that evil can win simply because it's powerful. Sometimes a mother's love really can change the world, and sometimes the most powerful weapon you can have is the truth and the courage to tell it. Thank you for listening to our story. Thank you for believing in justice, and thank you for proving that even in the darkest times, there are always people willing to stand in the light. Keep fighting, keep believing, keep hoping. The world is counting on you.